Hello and welcome to Election 21 Question Time. In this edition, we feature the candidates looking to represent Douglas East. Joining me on the panel are Claire Barber, Joni Farragher, Peter Gilmore, Michael Josem, John Jockin, Christine Urquhart and Amanda Walker. Following the general election on September the 23rd, two of them will be elected to the House of Keys. But before we start the questions, we're giving each candidate up to 2 minutes to introduce themselves. And first up, we start with Claire Barber. Claire.
Thank you. Hi there, I'm Claire Barber and I've had the privilege of standing and representing Douglas East constituency for the past 5 years, and I'll be seeking re-election at the general election for 2021. It's been an absolute honour working on both legislation, policy development, but also scrutiny and challenging those areas where I've felt that things could have been better. I've chosen the island as my home, and it is absolutely the place where I want to be based for the rest of my life. And since taking on the care of my two stepsons, Oliver and Benjamin, I'm very focused on the sustainability of our island and the social and economic progress that we need to get us to the right place. So I hope you can put your trust in me for the general election and vote Claire Barber on September the 23rd.
Thank you. Joni Farragher.
Thank you. Good evening. In standing for election, I'm calling for a fresh approach and a different style of government from what we've seen in recent times. I'm Joni Farragher. I was born and raised in Douglas. I went to university and I have 3 degrees, one of which is teacher training, and I currently work across our island schools with children and young people who are bereaved. So what do I think we need from our government? First up, we need to reforge the connection between government and the people. Too many people feel that there is a disconnect between the policies that government pursues on the one hand and what people need and want in their day-to-day lives on the other hand. And we need to bring those back into alignment so that we have a true listening leadership. Second up, we need to... I'm sorry. I've forgotten what my second point was. However, what I would like to see is effective prioritisation and goal setting on our government's part. So I feel that the programme for government is too vague in that it has objective strategies, and I would like to see that replaced with policies that the government feel are a priority over the course of their administration, alongside effective goal setting, through which the government will describe how they will enable improvements in those priority areas. My priorities, if elected, would be education, so inclusivity for all pupils, as well as retention and well-being of staff. It would be housing. Quite simply, all people on the island should be able to afford a home over here, and if we support them in doing so, that will actually have huge positive benefits for our economy. Health and well-being, just too big an area to summarise rapidly, but we do need to keep our eye on what Manx Care are doing in terms of their outcomes. And last but definitely not least, the environment. The island is for all of us to enjoy. We want to be able to pass that on to future generations. We need to lead effective change in renewable energy. Thank you.
Thank you, Joni. Peter Gilmore.
Hi, I'm Pete Gilmore. I'm 59 years old and I'm one of 4 generations born and living on the island. Being one of 4 generations, I get to see all the issues across the family, including everything from nursery costs through to education, work, pensions, and even the care of the elderly. After I left school, I joined the Royal Air Force. I did 9 years in the Air Force. Since then, I've worked for quite a few different large companies, both on the island and off island. And I've also studied for 2 degrees, an engineering degree, and I did an MBA. The kind of projects I've worked with are many and varied. I've spent a lot of time working on IT projects, but I've also done projects as varied as management reduction programs and even the build and fit out of a bank. The reason I'm standing is I think Tynwald is a talking shop, and it has been for many years. It's a paper-based organisation in a digital world. So what I'd like to see is the Isle of Man far more involved in the digital economy. We need to do far more to do that. We have a major skills crisis here that we have to address, and it's compacted by a housing crisis. People need to realise that companies are finding it very difficult here now to recruit and expand. And we're losing so many youngsters. 40% of our youngsters under 30 are leaving every year since 2011. So those are the major areas I want to address.
Thank you, Peter. Michael Josem.
Thank you, Richard. My name's Michael Josem, and our campaign is for all of us. It's a campaign for people, whether you've been on the Isle of Man for hundreds of generations or whether you're a relative newcomer. Our campaign is focused on a number of key areas. First of all, it's about ensuring and improving accountability for senior government officials. We have a series of projects, whether it be Douglas Prom, whether it be the Liverpool landing stage, whether it be something like the watersides at the NSC. It's time to improve accountability in our government. Second of all, we're working hard to, and we need to have a clear program to recover and rebuild from the pandemic. We have a shadow mental health pandemic on this island, and speaking to so many residents here on the Isle of Man, I know and I've heard firsthand how many families have been touched by the black dog of mental illness and how many people are suffering from ongoing physical health problems as well. And third of all, we've got to ease the squeeze on the cost of living. From young families starting out trying to find housing, I hear firsthand many of my friends of our generation are having real difficulty. And at the other end, we've got people who are living on fixed incomes and finding that their income just is not going far enough. And so that's why we've got a comprehensive plan to ease the squeeze on the cost of living. You're only going to be able to hear from a few of us for a few minutes here tonight, but a lot of the plans that I talk about are detailed a lot further online at michaeljosem.com, and I encourage you to have a look at that, provide your feedback, because our campaign is for all of us.
Thank you, Michael. John Jockin.
Hello, everybody. My name's John Jockin. My political career spreads over 9 years. I've been 8 years as a Douglas councillor. I've been 3 years as the Mayor of Douglas. I have been just short of a year of an MHK for Douglas East in the past. And I've been a branch secretary of the CWU Postmen's Union for almost 20 years. I've lived in East Douglas for 30 years and brought my family up in East Douglas. I'm passionate about the island, and I'm passionate about East Douglas. That's why I live here. My family have lived on this island for 500 years, and that's why I want to protect the people in the Isle of Man, because I care about it. The things that are going to affect this government, for future coming government, I think that this government, the last government, have been basically dealing with Westminster. They've been dealing with Brexit, the VAT bombshell, COVID, and they've taken their eye off the ball of the Isle of Man. The people in the Isle of Man have not been looked after properly for this past 5 years. House prices are soaring. Pensions are the lowest in Europe. That's the state pension. We have a Ponzi scheme of a government scheme that's been talked about for 40 years and nobody has addressed it. It's been in the last 3 manifestos that I've done and still nobody has done anything about it. It is unsustainable and it's a burden on the taxpayer and every person on this island, and it's what's going to bring this government down eventually. And the other thing is sustaining our young people. We need affordable housing for our young people in this island. We haven't built any for 17 years, and we haven't done any renewable energy for nearly 20 years. We need renewable energy and affordable housing and good prospects for our young people, or it's going to end up like Bournemouth.
Thank you, John. Christine Urquhart.
Hi, thank you, Richard. I'm running for Douglas East constituency, and threw myself into the political arena out of sheer frustration with the government, frustration with the lack of transparency, the frustration with the common man on the street not feeling he can speak to government and the MHKs, and when he does, doesn't feel like he's being heard. I am running for, I want to put care back into health and social care. I want to help try and bring those waiting lists down. Affordable housing, policy that's fit for purpose. We have employed persons benefits within the DHSS, but it discriminates against single persons who are living in or staying in abusive relationships, whether that be at home with their parents or with a partner, because they cannot afford to rent on their own. So that is something that's really high on my remit, is to sort that out, to affordable housing, social housing, investment in the island. The best way to, I feel, to restore economic recovery is to invest in local business. Local business is what made the Isle of Man in the first place. Local business is what's going to keep the Isle of Man on its feet. Invest in the people, invest in our children, invest in their futures. Yeah, that's, without that, I think we will fail. So thank you.
Thanks, Christine. Amanda Walker.
Right. Hi, my name is Amanda Walker and I'm a politics graduate. I've had a lifelong interest in politics. I stood for the Keys last time. I stood for the council twice in between. My major motivation for wanting to stand is because I think politics is pretty broken at the moment. I think there's an awful lot of apathy. The voter turnout is extremely low, and I understand why it is, because of the disconnect that Joni alluded to. I think we also have an awful lot of politics by social media, which is loud and shouty and doesn't listen and isn't nuanced and leads to aggression and adversarial politics. I particularly think that characters like Boris Johnson and Nigel Farage in the UK political scene have led to an increasing polarisation, which leads to even more people being completely disconnected from the political process. Here on the island, I think the key priorities have got to be rebuilding after the COVID pandemic. I think we've got to reduce the size of government. It is absolutely ludicrous, and the number of people on enormous salaries for what is basically a town council in terms of the size and scale of it. I also think that there needs to be a key prioritisation of mental health. I think we have a huge problem with the abuse of drugs on the Isle of Man, which is largely symptomatic of a mental health crisis. The waiting times for young people to be able to see healthcare professionals are absolutely outrageous. As a teacher of 36 years experience and somebody who has worked for the last 8 months with young people who are in our criminal justice system, I have seen firsthand that we have completely lost the war on drugs. So I think we've got to have a priority of winning the peace on drugs. I think we've got to sort the healthcare service out. I think it's very, very easy to criticise the last administration. However, instead of recriminations, we need to do reformation and build back stronger. I'd like to see major electoral reform as well, and I most certainly don't want to see government by social media. I think that's an appalling way to go. I think if you elect me, you're electing me for 5 years, and I will do exactly what I say I will do on the doorstep.
Thank you very much, Amanda. A few of you touched on it already. I just want to talk about housing as the first question. The Isle of Man government actively promotes to the outside world that there are no restrictions for new residents and investors on purchasing property in the island, and there's no stamp duty payable. And obviously at the same time, our resident population are experiencing huge difficulties in getting on the property ladder and are faced with increasing levels of rent. Does this situation need to change? Do we need to put restrictions on new residents and investors buying property? Are there other solutions you'd like to see? Joni Farragher?
Yeah, so I have outlined in my manifesto that I would like to see us to ban offshore speculation in our property market. Other countries have done the same. Other countries that are in a similar position to us in terms of their housing. Exactly as you said, Richard, the young people are unable to get on the property ladder. We're seeing them leave in droves, and that is causing a demographic imbalance, really, which we absolutely urgently need to address. I would also like to see further support for both first-time and last-time buyers. Something that's quite often not really mentioned is that lots of people actually are looking to downsize and they don't get any support for doing so, and I would like to see that support go hand in hand.
Okay, thank you. John Jockin?
Yeah, I see where you're coming from with house prices and people having multiple occupancies. I don't think you can really stop people from buying houses. You can't stop developers, but what you need to do is protect the people on the island that want to buy houses. Places like Edinburgh and London and York are very expensive places to live as well, but they still have to have a workforce within it. So you either go to a Jersey system, where you have a system where the locals can buy something a bit cheaper. I don't want to put people on reservations. I want them to mix with the rest of society. I don't like we had that terrible disaster at St John's in the 1970s. That was an awful thing that they built. They need proper housing to live in. but it's up to the government to provide it. They're their workforce, and we're only as good as our workforce.
Thank you. Claire Barber.
Yeah, I think there's a number of elements we need to look at. There's absolutely, I think, a synergy between us and the likes of Jersey and Guernsey and the schemes that they have there, which have been mentioned by Joni, and I think we should explore how that would work on the island. But I also think there's something around gazumping, and I'm really uncomfortable with this behaviour that I'm seeing happen more often. And people who've saved diligently for a deposit, they've got enough money to pay the conveyancing fees, and then at the last minute they get told you've got to put an extra £10,000 offer in or you lose the property. And I actually would like to see legislation brought in that where a vendor gazumps, they should have to cover the legitimate costs of the buyer, because I'm really uncomfortable that it puts people in a detrimental position having got themselves to a position to buy. So I think that's another facet to it. But then also looking at increasing the first-time buyer provision. Too often we're seeing developments where they have to provide a certain quantity of first-time buyer housing, and that's just not being built. We need to redevelop our brownfield sites. We need to use the development corporation that's been brought into being, and that needs to be very focused on getting affordable housing for both first-time buyers but also for people across the field, to allow people to move both up and down, and free up other properties to let people move and transition and grow as their family either grows or contracts.
Okay, thank you. Michael Josem.
Richard, fundamentally the problem that we have is that our housing market is currently like a game of musical chairs, where we have people scrambling and fighting to get a limited number of chairs, a limited supply. And under the current situation, only the biggest, most aggressive kid is able to get a chair, able to get a home. And we need to fix that on both ends. First of all, we need to build enough houses and enough homes for everyone to have one. So that means sites such as Walpole Street and Fort Street and Parade Street and Lord Street and North Quay and Regent Street and South Quay, the centre of our town, currently looks like a bomb site. And we need to fix that. And second of all, we do need to take action and to carefully scrutinise people who are using the Isle of Man housing system for financial speculation, because the Isle of Man housing market needs to be first and foremost about providing homes for people who are going to live here on the Isle of Man. So if you're looking here to speculate, that needs to be carefully scrutinised and carefully reviewed.
Thanks. Amanda Walker.
I think the housing market is definitely a real issue. However, I don't believe that there was ever a mythical time when it was very easy to buy a house. I think people always struggled to get a deposit together, and people very often used to move in with their parents or live in multi-occupancy for a long time to save a deposit. I would be very opposed to stopping investment in the island, because I think that happens absolutely everywhere. And I think for those of us who are approaching pension age, it's a major way that pension funds invest. And given what has happened with office space recently and the possible long-term impact of the pandemic, I think investment in residential housing is something that pension funds are going to have to be able to do. So I think it's a much more nuanced area, and I think to just see it in sort of black and white and make it into a generational conflict is a very difficult thing to do. I think that it's got to be much more carefully considered, and that there's an awful lot of work needs to be done on it. And I certainly would be very much in favour of developing brownfield rather than greenfield sites. I'm very happy to see the Development Corporation. I think that's a very good move. However, I don't want it just reduced to being sort of it's solely about young people struggling, because I don't think it is. Downsizing is extremely difficult because the smaller properties are at a premium and command a huge price, so that makes it very difficult for people attempting to downsize as well.
Thank you. Christine Urquhart.
I think everybody's concentrating on the private housing. Nobody's really thinking about the social housing. Our population is growing, and not everyone has been afforded the opportunity to save those deposits because of minimum wage, 0 hours contracts that they get stuck into. So I think the social housing stock needs to be expanded also to take the pressure off the private housing stock as well, with the rents, the high rents, etc. And I think it needs to be regulated. These people who are buying these properties, they need to be scrutinised. I think one of us agree on that. They need to be scrutinised, ensure that they're living here and not just buying up properties to put out at high rents, which is adding to the poverty factor that we're living in now.
Thank you. Peter Gilmore.
Yeah, I think there should probably be some kind of regulation or maybe taxation for people who own, say, more than one buy-to-rent house. Pretty much our young people are being financially cleansed from the island because we're not controlling who's coming in and buying houses. So we're ending up a bit like a gated community with a lot of more older people, and that's driving away, like I mentioned earlier, 40% of our youngsters every year. So we really need to look at this, and we can't just ban people from buying houses, because a lot of people who buy houses over here invest in other things like businesses and things. So I think probably for the investors, what we need to do is start looking at offering maybe like bonds and alternative investments that they can get their return on, because it's common sense. If you're getting no interest from the bank, you're going to go for the next best thing, and for many people that's property. They get a typical return of about 7%. You're not going to get that, well, 5 to 7% depending on the property. You're not going to get that from a bank. So we need to maybe think about offering a bond. A lot of people, for instance, want to invest in things like that, you know, to buy the new boat, and so instead of us borrowing money, we should offer that kind of thing. But we really need to think about joining the whole of housing up. Government have talked about joining housing up 3 or 4 times over the last 3 or 4 parliaments. And there's a journey. You may start at your parents, you may end up in social housing, you may be a first-time buyer, you may have a family, then you want to downsize into sheltered accommodation, then you may end up in nursing care. So the whole thing needs joining up. It should be a one-stop place. There should be a whole strategy about it. So that's kind of what I think.
Thanks very much, Peter. We have a couple of questions from the audience members in tonight.
1 in 6 workers on the Isle of Man earn less than the living wage. What policies do you have to increase wages on the Isle of Man and deal with unscrupulous employers?
Okay, Christine Urquhart.
I haven't got an answer. I'm going to be honest. I haven't got an answer. I don't know what the answer is to that, to be honest. So,
okay, Michael Joseph.
Our policy is to lower taxes for low-income workers. I think that people who are earning below the living wage should not face income tax. The cost to the Isle of Man budget, the Isle of Man government budget, is about £3 million a year, and I think that by reducing the taxes on such workers, it'll help people get back into the workforce, help struggling families keep more money in their pocket, and also reward people for getting back into the dignity of work. Because in the long term, the best cure for poverty is to get into work, to get into earning money, and to build a track record of work in paid employment.
Thanks. Claire Barber.
Yeah, interestingly, actually, I would agree. One of the items in my manifesto is to say we should increase the income tax threshold to match with living wage. I think it's absolutely imperative. If we're identifying that as a living wage, we should have everything working around that to acknowledge that and to reinforce that by our policies. So I think that would be a very important element of it. But it's also looking at people who've fallen out of employment system for other reasons, whether that be through criminal behaviours, they end up in the prison, looking at education opportunities, lifelong learning, retraining. I think there's a whole host of things that we can do to provide support to people to enable them to get into other employment and away from 0 hours contracts, which ultimately takes the ability for them to look at purchasing houses and all those other opportunities away. So I think there's a number of things that would need to come together, but as an absolute principle, we should have the living wage as where we're our starting point.
Thank you. Peter Gilmore.
The problem with the Isle of Man and its cost of living means we'll be forever, unless we start controlling the overall costs, the cost of transport, the cost of food, the cost of housing. Until we take action on that, we'll be forever chasing this dream of a living wage. So we do need to sort the things that are in our power to do straight away. I do believe in the living wage, and I think unscrupulous employers, well, unscrupulous employers should be reported, obviously, but if they're paying the minimum wage, they're not unscrupulous by definition, you know. So I think it's a difficult one. People don't like whistleblowing and telling tales on the Isle of Man, but people should feel confident they can report an employer.
Thank you. Amanda Walker, your view?
I think of those 1 in 6 people, probably a very high percentage of them are female. And I think that, and as well, alongside the living wage issue, there's the issue of childcare. And I think that on average in the UK, the household expenditure on childcare is currently running at about 30%. If we compare ourselves to countries like Sweden, their average is around 5%. There's also a huge amount of anxiety about the cost of going to work as well, because we have a benefits system which benefits you not working in many ways. Because if you are going into into low-paid employment or minimum wage employment, you'll lose your housing benefit, which then may often mean that there's a disincentive to actually be working because you find yourself financially worse off. You also have insecurity of childcare because the pandemic has actually led to closure of some nurseries as well and reduction in the number of childcare places. So I think there's a whole range of interconnected issues. It's like many of the other issues in government. It doesn't stand solely on its own. It's interconnected. And I think also things like the impact on the environment, then we also need to look at things like free transport for people who are on low wages, because very often the jobs are not necessarily where the people are actually living. So to be able to match up the two things, and I think it's important to have an integrated strategy that looks at the issue in a holistic way and actually tries to be people-centred and people-focused and look at the individual needs. We are a very small place, so we can have a tailored approach.
Thank you. John Jockin?
Yeah, well, I basically agree with most of what everybody's had here to say, but what I will say is from my experience of working over the past 45 years, in the early days I spent most of my life chasing Manx employers paying terrible wages. And now I see we're chasing the Isle of Man government paying terrible wages, putting people on PPP contracts, casual contracts. These are our own workforce, the people that work for the government. The government should be treating their workforce better than what they're treating them. We are treating our staff appallingly as employers, the Isle of Man government. And that is what the problem is and why these wages are so low. Some people are only doing 20 hours. And then, oh, by the way, you can have 25 next week if you behave yourself.
Thank you. Joni Farragher.
Well, firstly, the Tynwald Committee on Poverty's second report did recommend that minimum wage was raised to the living wage, and that's been accepted by Tynwald. So that will transition within 5 years. I like your part of the question that was looking at obligations of employers, because I think that we don't have very robust legislation in place to actually deal with employers who are breaking workplace laws, who are breaking legislation. And I would like to see us making that legislation more robust and actually having tangible methods to check and penalise employers who aren't in line with current employment legislation. I do like some of the ideas that lots of people have said. I fully agree that income tax should be in line with the living wage, and I also think that some of the ideas that other people have pulled in that would ease poverty, such as fare free transport, is something that I've advocated for a long time. Looking at training opportunities for people in the workplace, as well as in their when they're a mature student, basically, in order to close in on the impacts of childhood trauma. So yeah, that's my response.
Thank you. Can we have the next question, please?
A question again to all candidates. And do you think the current rules governing campaign financing for House of Keys elections are sufficiently robust to ensure adequate levels of transparency and fairness in the process?
Okay, thank you. Michael Josem.
So my view is that we'll have to try and see what happens during this election campaign to see whether they work or they don't work. And then I think after we've had at least one run through, we'll benefit from the experience that we're about to go through.
Thank you. Amanda Walker.
I'm very concerned about the increase in the amount of money that you're allowed to spend on the campaign, actually, because I think it's a return to the 18th century, and I think it's going back to people being able to buy votes effectively, because if you have sponsors and deep pockets, you're able to run a very elaborate media campaign. If you are a single person living in Douglas who actually really wants to be an MHK and you've got to do it all yourself, you have to dig very deep into your own pocket. So I think it's a major, major concern. I would like a fixed, tight budget for it, so it's actually about the people and the policies rather than how deep your pockets are or what murky sponsors you might have.
Thanks. Joni Farragher.
I fully agree with, and that is exactly what I was really going to say. I was very surprised at the high level of spending that is allowed for each person's campaign, and felt like it would mean that you could effectively buy votes, and I would have liked to have seen it quite drastically reduced, really, so that we are. Yeah, I mean, I can only echo Amanda really on that one.
Thank you. John Jockin.
Yeah, I did notice the increase in the expenditure, but I think I certainly won't be using all mine, that's for sure. It'll probably be something in what I used last time. But to cut back on the cost. I myself personally have decided that I will deliver all my manifestos myself. I won't claim any postage. There'll be no bill going to the government or the taxpayer, and that'll be about £1,500 saved. And if you count the 7 candidates here, that's a lot of money.
Thank you. Claire Barber.
I think it's been a real positive change to actually have the declaration of interests. I think that's something we haven't had previously, and I'm very pleased to see that made available at this election. In line actually with the last election, I will also be delivering all of my manifestos, and I did a calculation actually based on how many candidates there were across the island at the 16th of August, and it's £109,641 and a few pence is the cost of manifesto delivery across the whole island. I think that money could be far better spent elsewhere and not on delivering manifestos when we're treading the doors anyway, and we should be delivering them as we go.
Thank you. Peter Gilmore.
Yeah, I agree the limit's gone up a bit too much, I think, and it does disenfranchise some people, and that should be thought about. As for if it's transparent enough, I think we'll only know that after the election, when all of the new legislation will have been tested for the first time. In terms of deliveries and doing your own manifestos, well, we already employ a post office service, so what are we going to do? Just let them sit on their backsides while we all do their work for them. So they're already getting paid to do that, so I don't. And the money goes back into the Isle of Man coffers, so I don't see a problem with that.
Thank you. And Christine Urquhart.
I thank you for the question, actually, because I have no support. I'm not with a party, I'm independent, and I am doing this on my own on nothing. So I don't think these big budgets are required. I will be taking out my manifestos on my own as well. To save the government. We've just had the COVID crisis. How can we explain spending thousands of pounds when we're already out knocking on doors anyway? So just deliver it while you're there. But yeah, I think it's been raised too high, especially in the climate that we're in now.
Thank you very much. Is there another question from the audience?
It seems that the motorist is being targeted in many ways without professional consideration of the advances made by manufacturers to reduce and eliminate CO2 emissions, nor the practicalities of any policies which are being promoted at the moment to restrict the use of vehicles, such as parking restrictions, with the obvious negative effects of the businesses in the town and the rest of the island. What are the candidates' views on the place which the motor vehicle plays in the life of the island, both recreationally and essential travel?
Claire Barber.
So I think it's important to recognise that there's a number of different mechanisms of transport, and for some people it's absolutely imperative they can park very close to the shops, the services that they need because of disability or reduced mobility. And I think that we mean to enable spaces for people who are in those positions. However, I do think it's also really important that we encourage active travel. We need to make it possible to cycle. We need to make it safe to cycle and walk. We need to look at how we increase use of public transport because I think that benefits all of us. We've talked about the options around fare-free travel. That's something that I'd certainly like to see, even if we start on key strategic routes. I think we need to start somewhere. So I don't see this as sidelining the motorists completely, but I think it's about making sure that the spaces we have available are shared equally amongst all road users and making sure that the most vulnerable, which ultimately is the person who is the pedestrian or the cyclist, have to be protected within that. Thank you. Peter Gilmore?
Well, we're always going to have essential travel, whether that's delivering food and people who can't get to shops themselves by any other means. I think all of motoring is going to face a problem over the next 10 years. There's a move now to electric cars. When we think about Douglas, in the constituency of Douglas East, there's about 3,500 houses. 1,800 of them are flats and apartments. So we've got potentially dozens of people living in one block, and they've got a minimum number of parking places. Where are they going to charge their electric cars, etc.? So I think over the next few years, people are going to realise we can't have charging points like parking meters all over the pavement, you know. And I think people are going to be incentivised if they live in town, maybe to get, if you don't have a car, you get a free bus pass, that kind of thing. But yeah, I think there is a bit of a pressure on the motorist. I think some of that's driven by maybe a small group of people in government. You know, we have small roads. It's difficult to accommodate both cyclists and cars and trucks, etc., on our roads. So I think there's a bit of a battle at the moment, and I think that will continue. And I think cyclists need to go off the main roads. I think, you know, we need to kind of give a pathway from, say, Douglas to Peel, maybe use the old railway line, something like that, so people can still ride safely as families, etc. But there's going to be a battle between the motorist and the cyclist and active travel, and I think because a lot of people don't want to face up to the fact that we've got to deal with climate change.
Thank you. Amanda Walker.
I don't think there necessarily has to be a battle between the car and the cyclist and the pedestrian. I'm concerned about the push towards electric cars because I think there are huge environmental concerns about electric cars themselves. The batteries in them have huge difficulties when they have to be recycled. Recycling them is extremely difficult. The extraction for the materials that go into them has a hugely negative environmental impact as well. More than anything else, I think, on the Isle of Man, the biggest issue for car users is the state of the roads, and that's the thing I think we need to get right more than anything else, get the basics right, actually get our roads into a better state of repair. I think it's a very good reason why it's called a vehicle tax rather than a road tax now, because we're not paying to improve the roads quite blatantly and clearly. So I would definitely like to see a priority for active travel. I would like to see some of the traffic lights in Douglas, their priorities change, because I think there are several places in Douglas, particularly as you go down towards the Market Hall, where the priorities are clearly set for vehicles and pedestrians have to wait for a very significant length of time until the pavement's extremely crowded. If we're serious about active travel, then it's got to be more pro-pedestrian, and I definitely would like to see cycle routes, not just the Peel to Douglas one, which has been massively improved because a lot of the gates have been removed. It used to be very, very slow. I used to cycle into QE2 sometimes, and you had to stop, get off, open the gate and move round. So that's been a definite improvement. I would like to see more cycleways and cycling to school as well. I think encouraging our children to be more active would be a very good thing.
Thank you. Joni Farragher.
Yeah, I think the question pivots really around the fact that we're at the start of a transition phase into a shared space philosophy. And I think it's quite important to note that that is based upon quite solid research about, first of all, what we need to do to address the climate emergency. And second, what actually improves well-being and ability to move around freely and aesthetics within town centres. So I get your point that it feels like the motorist is being pushed, and I also would highlight the fact that we will always need at certain stages of our life or certain sectors of our society will need the private motor vehicle. But I actually do feel like it's a very positive thing that we're moving more towards this research-based idea of how a town should look, that's based more around public transport, that's based more around pedestrianisation and cycle lanes. So I do think that it's positive, although I acknowledge the point of your question.
Thank you. Christine Urquhart.
I agree that the motorist is being vilified at the moment. I think there's too much traffic on the roads for the size of the island. The size the island is. But I also agree with active travel. I would like to see park and ride schemes put on the outskirts of Douglas, provide parking, and give people the option. You know, you pay for the parking, you get the free bus. You pay for the bus, you get the free parking, to bring them into Douglas, to allow for that more active travel within Douglas, except for essential travel for those that are disabled, etc., to come in. I think that's a scheme that definitely I will be pushing for, park and ride around on the outskirts of Douglas and other towns on the island.
Thank you. John Jockin.
Yeah, thank you, John, for the question. I think I know where you're coming from. It's, I mean, the Isle of Man for 100 years has thrived on a petrol engine. Right? It's made us prosper through motorcycle racing, through car racing, rallying, all that sort of stuff that goes on the Isle of Man. It's a niche market that people pay a lot of money to come and see. Okay, I understand the electric power and the faults that it has. Lithium batteries only last 10 years, and you have to bury them in the ground after digging them up in the first place. They're not proven to be as economical as they say they are. That's a matter of opinion. And then, of course, the electricity. Where's the electricity coming from? It's coming from Russia through a gas pipe, and the biggest pollution we have on the Isle of Man is from the power station, it's 33%. So now we're going to charge up more electric cars, so it's going to go up to 40, 45, 50% to charge up all the electric cars. So I'm all right, you probably have less fuel getting burnt, but it's a false economy that we're talking about. What we need is a balance between the two. Either we'd have to have some sustainable electricity generated to do it, but not off gas. You can't have but one without the other, so you have to look at it from how you're going to balance it from that point of view. And the other thing is electric cars are far too expensive. They're far too expensive for most working people, I would say. So at the moment, it's not a reality, and there certainly isn't the infrastructure in it. We've just built a fantastic new promenade. I don't think there's a dozen electric points in it.
Thank you, Michael Joseph.
John, great question. I think there are two key themes to your question there. One is this idea of recreational motoring, and the other is day-to-day, commuting and so on. And I think that on the recreational side, the heritage of this island through the motorbikes, but also through the cars, is wonderful. And it's a wonderful thing that not just the internal combustion engine, but rather it's a tool that brings people together. And those community connections of our classic car clubs, of our motorbiking clubs, of the racing get-togethers is wonderful, because it allows people to get together and to share a love and to communicate and to talk. And I think that's magnificent, and I'm a big fan of the TT in that respect. And then the other half is the day-to-day commuting and getting around town. And I disagree very strongly with the current government's policy of trying to reduce the amount of car parking in central Douglas, whether it be on Capitol Road, where they tried to remove the car park there, but we were fortunate to stop, whether it be just mere months ago when Lord Street was left empty because of the current government's pig-headed attitude to preventing any temporary car parking in Douglas. And so I'm unashamedly a big fan of addressing the Douglas car parking problem on two levels. First of all, support the construction of car parks when and where is appropriate, and that includes on areas such as Castle Mona Avenue, where we have stretches of road where it's currently very tight, and we've, speaking to local residents there, a number of residents have raised directly with me the importance of looking how we can expand car parking there. That might include things such as extending the parking permit timeline, because I was chatting to a nurse the other day, came home off their shift in the middle of the night, but all the car parking spots were gone because the permit parking is only during the daytime peak time. And so I think that we can fix that. Second of all, there's opportunities to realign some car parking in some streets in consultation with local residents to introduce right-angle car parking here and there. And I think we've also got to move towards reducing the demand for car parking by allowing the safe and responsible regulation of personal electric vehicles. I was very disappointed to see the other day the Isle of Man police wanting to crack down on personal scooters and new personal electric vehicles. I think we need to regulate them safely. I think we need to ensure that they're up to standard so that the people of the Isle of Man get a safe ride, but also reduce the demand for parking. And then finally, we need to recognise that there are more and more people working from home, and so those people need fast, reliable, stable internet access, and that I think that a few houses here and there will be able to reduce their parking needs as well.
Thank you. Any more from the audience?
I agree with the housing issues, but I walk around Douglas and there are so many houses that are in a great state of disrepair, and then I see outside of Douglas new developments for first-time buyers, but I would like to see more redevelopments of those houses that are in disrepair within Douglas, and how would you approach that problem to kind of make Douglas look a lot better for those of us who have invested in properties there?
Thank you. Does anybody want to add to that, Michael?
Yeah. I agree deeply. We need to build new housing, but we also need to renovate our existing housing stock. Especially in the social housing area. I don't think it's any exaggeration to say that one of the worst landlords on the Isle of Man is Douglas Borough Council. I hear time and time again from local residents who are complaining about mould in their housing. They complain about the state of their social housing. And I believe that housing is fundamentally a human right, and it needs to be a human right at a high standard that is safe, it's secure, it's got to be dry. This is the basis, and I really agree deeply with everything you've just said there.
Thanks. Amanda, you had your hand up.
Yes, I think there's a huge issue with dereliction and derelict properties in Douglas East. Quite a number of them are, even the ownership of them is quite difficult to establish. And when you do establish the ownership of them, quite often it's people who've acquired them as a long-term investment, often developers who have no interest in maintaining them because they wish them to go into such a state of disrepair that they then have a mandate to be able to demolish and build something that they would be able to make a far greater profit out of. That's clearly absolutely scandalous. I think there are also a number of buildings like the nurses' home, for example, that has been empty for so long and nothing has been done with it. That could have provided temporary accommodation or medium-term accommodation to address the homelessness issue in the Isle of Man as well. So to be having buildings lying empty when we have people living on the street is just absolutely ridiculous, and it clearly needs to be addressed. And the issue with Douglas as a landlord as well is that many of the properties that do suffer with the damp were built when we had coal fires, and the ventilation for coal fires is completely different to the type of ventilation required for central heating now. So it's actually fundamental problems, and some of that is to do with planning as well, because some of the issues to do with coal fires, the things that you can do as an architect or as an environmental designer to improve the standard of the property are actually forbidden by the planning regulations. So it's a sort of very, very difficult one to balance, but we certainly need to have a very good look at making the social housing effective, and also looking at, I would seriously look at having a right to buy scheme, because I think we have an awful lot of people log jamming local authority housing who have lived in the house for generations, believe it is their home and are very established in it and want to stay there, but are not moving out, so that we're creating a throughput of people who need the social housing. I would ring fence any money that was acquired through the sale of houses and use it to develop new housing, so that we've got a new supply coming through constantly.
Thank you. Claire Barber?
Yeah, I think we need to have government actually working really strongly with local authorities and the dilapidations officers to actually compel the work to be done on the houses, and if it isn't done, to actually undertake the work and put a charge against the house. And I think we need to do that far more proactively. There is absolutely, as you rightly say, a large number of properties that I've been incredibly frustrated with across Douglas East, and as you say, there's often challenges around who the owners are, or where they are, in fact. But I think we need to be far more robust in that, and it's certainly been a frustration of mine. So I'd be very keen to pick that back up.
Thank you. Peter and then John.
Yeah, there's a lot of acreage in brownfield in Douglas, and that should certainly be utilised. I think the developers have too much control of what's going on at the moment, and I think the government need to focus immediately on their housing policy, join it up, and start using some of the levies that are in their control, like Section 13 of the Planning Act, to stop some of these developers building on green sites and force them over the next few years to develop on the brownfield sites.
Thank you. John Jockin?
Yeah, we strayed a bit off the question a bit, to be quite honest with you. I thought we were talking about the infrastructure in the streets of Douglas and the state of the pavements and all that, and that was the bit that I was hoping to get back to. What happened when this calamity happened was when we had the Douglas Borough Council and the Highway Board, and they merged the two of them. And that was in the 1980s. So that meant the budget for Douglas was moved into a big budget, and that big budget was spent all down the island, and a little tiny bit of the budget was given to Douglas. So all the back lanes and all the pavements, all the little nonsensy bits that they were supposed to maintain, they all went into a lovely road in St Mark's, a lovely road round Gansey, a lovely road going into Port Erin, and that's where all the money went, and it hasn't been spent in Douglas. And it hasn't been spent in Douglas for 30 years, and that's what's wrong. They need to get their hands back on that budget and fix some of these old streets, some of the oldest streets on the Isle of Man that have never ever been repaired since it was handed over in the 1980s. And that's what's wrong with them pavements and streets. They've never been repaired, and that is shocking. And it's a shame on this government that they've been putting it on vanity projects just to put in their own areas, so they say, look what we did, we fixed this road for you, which road didn't need fixing in the first place. 33% of the people live in Douglas. 33% of the budget should be spent in Douglas. And there's no always talking about the promenade. There hasn't been a penny spent on that promenade in 100 years. And what really galls me about that promenade, 8 Douglas MHKs, 8, and not one of them was involved in that promenade. Not one of them. The biggest thing to happen in Douglas and Douglas East in 100 years, and nobody was involved in it. They should be ashamed of themselves. So go into the inquiry afterwards. It's too late.
Excellent. Hopefully get onto the promenade later. Johnny Farragher, do you want to...
Yeah, I just wanted to say, in answer to your question, I'm kind of straight off a little bit there, but I would take a two-pronged approach, really. Derelict properties, absolutely agree with Claire that we need to be more robust in how we actually deal with owners of those derelict properties. Another way that hasn't been mentioned is that people don't have to pay rates on vacant properties, and I think that needs to change because you take away the incentive then to have a property lying vacant. And secondly, the second tier of it would be to target builders and developers. So greenfield development should be an absolute last resort. They should have to absolutely prove that they've tried every single other form of brownfield development before they are even allowed to touch our countryside, and that should really be an absolute last resort, and that we need to bring in legislation to ensure that that's the case.
Thank you. Christine, anything to add?
I'm glad you raised the question because I've come across constituents who are living next door to derelict properties and it's affecting their properties, and trying to find the owners is near on impossible. I've been to the Public Records Office. It's a business that's bought it. This all needs regulating, and government needs to take a hold of that, and that's something I definitely will be pushing forward for regulation and proper strict legislation to make property owners responsible.
Thank you very much. Any more from the audience?
Many issues raised by candidates today are things that touch on the responsibilities of local authorities, such as the discussions from Mr. Joseph with regard to car parking, or derelict buildings, which is the responsibility of local authority, dealing with rates, a lot of local infrastructure, social housing, which was referred to by one candidate as the council being the worst landlord in the Isle of Man. How do we achieve your policies and goals, the various candidates, and how do you plan to work with Douglas Borough Council? Because as a councillor myself sitting in the chamber, I notice that there's quite a strong adversarial relationship between the council and the national government. Very often, the council feels as though it's underfunded compared to councils in the UK. Very many councils in the UK and neighbouring jurisdictions get quite a lot of funds from government to get get projects completed. How do you plan to work with the local council in order to see your policies implemented at the end of the day and sort of break down that adversarial relationship that we see?
Peter Gilmore.
Yeah. Well, what I intend to do is to go in to sit in public meetings and meet councillors. I know 2 in here already. Which, we do need to build that relationship up. There's been a major change in Douglas Corporation. A lot of the old guard have left. Some good ones and some bad ones have left. But only time will tell how the next council is going to turn out and which direction the rates are likely to go. But I think it's all about relationship building. But one example of housing, they tried to join up the LA housing in it with the same system, but it was like Douglas Corporation, they wanted to do theirs slightly different. We do need to join all the housing up. I think there should be a one-stop shop. If you're talking about just leaving home, going into social housing, or leaving social housing because your children have grown up and you want to downsize, I think it does all need to connect together. So I think we do need to work together a lot more. We can call it local government reform, but really it's just devolving the powers from government and joining them all up in a different, sensible way, and that we can all work together, but people just have to deal with one touch point.
Thank you. Christine.
I agree with Peter that social housing should all be under the one umbrella and dealt with that way. But I think more importantly, you're on the council for Douglas East in Douglas Council and we should be talking to each other. There should never have been a breakdown in that communication in the first place, and I understand why or how that can be maintained. We're all in this for the same reason, to make Douglas East a better place to live in and for the constituents. So I personally would be pushing to open relations with Douglas Council 100%, because we all have the same aim at the end of the day.
Thank you. Claire Barber, you've been MHK
yeah.
for Douglas East. How did you get on with Douglas Council?
Yeah, it's been interesting actually, because when we first started 5 years ago, we were having regular meetings with Douglas Council and they drifted off and there was reasons given and that hasn't really come back. But what I think has been really valuable actually has been the joint political surgeries, because invariably when people come along, there's issues that cross over both. And I think that's really given a great opportunity for engagement between the councillors and the MHA. So I'd really like to see that carrying on actually. I think it's imperative we have a really strong conversation between the councillors and the MHKs. I know that there's been emails that I've certainly worked on issues, with the councillors, recognising some areas are outside of my control. I'm not pretending to fix anything, but I also recognise that when someone has come and reached out for help, I think it's really challenging to then just pass them on, because sometimes that can be just enough to disrupt them and put them off seeking help entirely. So I think working together for me is paramount. That's something that I would absolutely commit to do, both through the surgeries, but also on a more regular level. I'd like to see those meetings restored, because I think it's in everyone's interest. I mean, I'd certainly be interested in looking at devolving other powers to the councils in the same way that happens in the UK. I think roads would be an ideal thing to be devolved to councils. I think, we need to work together. We need to come up with those structures, and actually that is going to need local authority reform on the peripheries. Douglas, I think, is a big council. It's working as a big council needs to, but there are some smaller authorities that simply don't have the economies of scale at the minute, and I think we have to look at that, especially with the lack of candidates coming forward in the last election.
Thank you. John Jockin?
Yeah, it's Devon, I've had quite a lot to do with Douglas Council over the years. And the government have a one-fits-all policy, and it doesn't work. Okay, so Douglas Borough Council has 2,900 houses, I think, just short. They've a massive investment plan. They've just built the Hazel Court development in my vein, and now they're building the Peel Road one. But the way the system works is, say £90 worth of rent, £30 goes to pay the loan, £30 goes for future investment, and £30 goes to maintenance on the properties. Well, when you've got the oldest properties in the Isle of Man going back to 1915, compared to some of the commissioners that are probably built in the 40s and the 60s, you've got the highest maintenance bills, so they're not getting maintained properly. So the one-fit-all system doesn't work. And unfortunately, the DOI is far too big. It should be moved, I think, to Home Affairs, because that's where it should be. They've got far too many commissioners. 21 commissioners is ludicrous. They should have only 4 or 5. We asked them to merge and let them do it themselves. Well, it's too late now. We've got to do it for them. Okay? We're not having people walking in unopposed with no mandate from the people. They need proper resources to run the north, the south, the east and the west. Okay, and that's the way they need to do it.
Veering off into another subject there, but Joni Farragher, your views?
Yeah, so thanks for asking that question. It's a really interesting one. I think that it's not effective for the electorate if local and national government aren't actually working in tandem and in a coordinated manner. I've personally tried to get to know lots of the Douglas councillors recently. As you know, I was at the count. And I think that cooperation, there's just not quite enough onus upon cooperation between, and team building really, which is something that I would be looking to do. I was going to mention, Claire's already mentioned it, joint political surgeries I think would just be an absolute must going forwards, and certainly team building is definitely the way to go between the two of them.
Thank you. Michael Joseph?
Yeah, I think it's a good question, Devon. I think that the process of government should essentially be transparent to the voter, and I mean it in 2 ways. First of all, whether it's the Douglas Borough Council or whether it's the Department of Infrastructure or it's the Department of Home Affairs, I don't really care. Because when someone comes to me with the dog poo that is littering in their backyard, whether it's the seeds that are strewing all over the street, they're not interested in a constitutional lecture about whether it's which department and which office is responsible. And I think it's really important for me as a member of the House of Keys and as a candidate for the House of Keys to take responsibility. And so that's why in recent weeks I've passed a whole bunch of issues to the Douglas Borough Council to relate and to raise. And to the Department of Infrastructure and so on. And I think it's really important that, when there are families struggling to put food on the table, when there are families who are, deal with, the water coming in through the bathroom. I see this every day, or every week rather, as a volunteer for the food bank. I go to these people and, they don't care whose fault it is. They care about fixing the problem. And so that's why I believe in taking responsibility for such things.
Thank you. Amanda Walker?
And I think the reorganisation of the council so that the council wards actually match the areas that the MHKs represent has been a very positive move. I personally think we need far more fundamental political reform. I still think we've got far too many MHKs. I would reduce the number of MHKs. We had to look seriously at major electoral reform, but I think that you have to work very closely with the council, and certainly I would be very interested in working with yourself and Andrew and Ian to make sure that the representation for Douglas East is cohesive and joined up, and that people actually have access to us as well. So open surgeries, regular open surgeries that were advertised and in an accessible place, I think would be a very good move forward. And as I think Michael was pointing out, it doesn't matter whether it's the national government or the local government responsibility, it's making sure that the constituents are actually getting the appropriate action taken.
Thank you. Is that all from the audience? Okay, just a simple, direct question. How should government finance its future commitments, which will need significantly increased funding as things stand? Do they increase taxes? Or do you look to reduce the size of government, including headcount, to enable it to focus on essential public services? Michael Josem.
Thanks for the question, Richard. I do not accept the premise that government funding needs to be increased. If we take an area such as healthcare, we spend about a quarter more on healthcare per capita than across. And listening to the new Manx Care CEO, Teresa Cope, the other day, she made the point that about half of that extra cost relates to special situations for us as an island, and that is things like you can't have half an operating room. And so for our population, we have significantly high costs. About half of it comes from being an island, but the other half is currently unexplained. And I think we need to investigate why that is. And I think that the reforms to Manx Care, while I was initially sceptical, they seem to have the right attitude. They seem to be heading in the right track of addressing that. Second of all, I think that we have all seen a number of cost blowouts and a number of capital projects, whether it be the Liverpool landing stage, whether it be Douglas Prom, whether it be the water slides at the NSC. And a recurring theme through each of these problems has been that the senior government officials are never held to account. There's no skin in the game. And so what we need to do is we need to start holding officials to account, not because we want to punish the officials, but because that will avoid the problem in the first place. In my professional career, leading teams, when we held people accountable, when we held me accountable, that helped things and it ensured that we got better outcomes in the first place.
Thank you. Claire Barber?
Yes, I think we absolutely need to look at the size of government, something that has been very challenging over the last couple of years with the COVID pandemic. We need to look at how we can deliver services in a more streamlined fashion, but also in the short term, there will be some front loading in order to make longer term savings. So I recognise that's the case with waiting lists. We can't change waiting lists unless we're willing to put money in. But the longer term, we'll get ourselves to a better position with a more structured level of staffing. So there's a number of pieces, but for me, I don't believe that we want to significantly increase taxes. I think that would put us in a damaging position, but I do think we should absolutely review things such as national insurance, which through the COVID pandemic, it became very clear that there was some real unfairness within the systems. And so for me, it's absolutely imperative we look at the fairness within those systems. And as I said before, it's absolutely right that we bring the lower income tax thresholds to meet the living wage. But we have to look at how we deliver a more efficient government. And I think we have to have that far more in-depth consultation with the people that ultimately we're serving as constituents of Douglas East about what services it is that they actually want provided and what things, as I said, we can look at devolving powers and funding through local authorities. There's definitely things we can do better and things that I'd like to explore further if I was to be elected for another 5 years.
Thank you. Christine Urquhart?
Can I ask you to repeat the question, Richard?
Yes, of course you can.
Purely for clarity, because it's going to go off a little bit.
Of course. How should government finance its future commitments, which will need significantly increased funding as things stand? Got climate change, increased health, social care costs, etc. Do we increase taxes? Or do we look to reduce the size of government, including headcount, to enable it to focus on those essential public services?
Well, that's scrutinising government headcount is something I have been shouting about for quite a while. And I don't know if reduction is the answer, but I definitely think it needs to be looked into with regards to staffing, etc. How do we improve? How do we increase our government funding? I think investing in local business, I'm going to keep saying that. You just keep investing in local business, and local business will invest in us. You invest in people, they will invest back. And I think that's the answer, that's the move forward.
Thank you. Peter Gilmore?
I don't think we want to be putting taxes up. And I understand what you say about the increased need for funding. For instance, Michael's report on health has identified that even with efficiency savings that he's kind of calculated we could make, that there'd still be £120 million spending shortfall in about 15 years. I think the answer is to do both things. Cut the size of government. There's a lot of duplication. There's a lot of people pushing data around there. We need to start joining up government people, processes, systems and information.
Where would you start?
Where would I start? Well, first one, I would start probably with Manx Care, because Manx Care has been set up and the systems it needs to operate have not been set up with it. So that's a priority. There's projects over the next couple of years to do that. That needs to be a priority that's done. Certainly with housing, there's a lot of duplication. There's a lot of like the local authorities need to share resources, you know, not set their own up, that kind of stuff. In terms of the other side of things, the main thing we need to do, of course, is increase our income streams. And the way to do that is, we're barely in the digital economy on the Isle of Man. We lose 40% of our youngsters at the moment because the three reasons they give are it's too expensive to live here, travel's too expensive to get back here, but they can't find the right type of jobs. Now, the digital economy, if we've learned one thing in this pandemic, or if everybody's learned one thing in this pandemic, IT people have known it for years, that you can work remotely. So we can set up new businesses here. We can set up, we've got experts in tax structures, accountancy, and in the legal professions. We can set up vehicles. We can create new companies. We can employ people around the world. We can train people here. And I think that's the way forward. I think there's a lot of money to be made from that. But we definitely need to look at the over-management that is in government.
Thanks. Joni Farragher.
Okay, well, there are going to be cost implications to the transitions that we need to make. But in the first instance, for example, around climate change, if we actually take decisive action right now, we can start talking, we'll stop talking about cost and start talking about revenue. But we need to take that decisive action right now, and that is the sort of urgent push, really, that we need to be in control of that transition. But secondly, in terms of raising additional revenue, I don't think that the lower and middle classes should have that burden. I think that we should look to adjusting the tax cap in order to raise additional funds for our government. Tax cap costs us an awful lot every year, and I think that it really should be the obligation of the people who are the wealthiest to shoulder the financial burden the heaviest. That's only fair.
Will we scare them off if we raise the tax cap or remove it?
According to research, no. Countries who've done this have found actually people are quite loyal. They have families, they have homes, they have an affinity with the island or wherever it is that they live. So according to countries who've done this, it's actually that concern just doesn't really bear out in reality. So yeah, I think there are other inventive ways, but possibly, according to the most responded to public consultation we've ever had, there is appetite on the island for legalisation of cannabis. That could be a huge revenue stream for the island if we were bold enough to make that decision.
Thank you. Amanda Walker?
And I think we have to constantly review what we're doing, and I think that raising taxes and making taxes fairer has got to be a key priority. I don't think we can just reduce the headcount of government in one fell swoop. I think we need to look at where we could redeploy and where we could retrain, and I think we have to stop viewing the economy solely in terms of revenue and profit. I think we have to start looking at it in terms of benefits and work-life balance, and in terms of the environmental impact that we have. And I certainly think that greening the economy can actually be something that has major long-term economic benefits, as long as we're not viewing it solely in terms of monetising the economy. And I think that the Isle of Man is an incredibly attractive place to live. It has got a huge amount going for it, and we should be prioritising those things rather than purely considering things in terms of a balance sheet, because I think that's a very 19th century way to look at economics. We live in the 21st century, and I think it's far more important to look at the longer term impacts and to look at how our economy serves us rather than being wage slaves to try and produce revenue to keep little mice turning round on wheels.
Thank you. John Jockin?
Well, it has to come through growth. Okay, that's the only way it is going to have to come, and if it doesn't come through growth, then you'll have to put up taxes. So the Isle of Man, in my lifetime, when I started out my working career, it was all tourism and aircraft engineering were the main providers of income, a little bit of farming. And over the years, we've had come the boom and bust years of banking, where there was a bank on every corner at one stage of the game and companies registered all over the place. Now we have these insurance companies doing extremely well over here. We didn't have these big firms before. They've been encouraged to come here. And 10 years ago, nobody had ever heard of net banking and what have you, internet banking. Now they're one of the major sources of revenue on the Isle of Man. This is in the space of 10 years. This is up to the Department of Enterprise to find new business. It's up to them to get out there and sell the Isle of Man. It's not that the businesses will come and go, especially if they're working from a keypad. You know, they can go anywhere in the world, but it's up to us to attract them and give them the right things to come in here. And Amanda here, I'm sorry, she dodged the bullet a little bit here saying we should go everything green. You did say, how are we going to pay for it? So, I mean, the elephant in the room that everybody knows is in the room is we've got a gas field right outside Ramsey Bay. And somebody wants to exploit it. And they could pay for all your green power. They've said they'd fund all your green power. Do you want to use that gas to fund your own power, or do you want the gas from Russia and keep paying for it very expensively?
I guess the other elephant in the room is the corporate tax rate. Is our 0-10 rate up for change, do you think? Should we scrap it and increase our corporate tax rate?
Under threat. The EU announced a threat earlier this year that they're looking at to blacklist any zero tax. So we are going to have to revisit that in some ways. The pressure seems to have gone off a little bit at the moment. Ireland and one or two other countries have kind of rejected it, but it's just slowed down at the moment. That pressure is still coming. There's a building world economic climate to push down against tax. That is a big risk to us, that zero tax. But when people say, should we raise taxes? In income tax is only about £220 million a year of the £1,300 million that comes in. Government pensions alone next year are going to take 11% of income tax. Then, because the public sector pension reserves run out, the year after that, they're going to take 44 million. That's 22% of income tax. So we've got to cut the size of government to reduce that burden, to get that pension bill back down to zero, and we need to make government far more efficient, effective and economic, not in terms of their procurement, their projects. We need to prioritise all the projects. We need to stop at the moment and pause, prioritise things, because we've got a lot of priorities in the list, and that's the first thing we need to do, is stop and say, what are we going to do? What do we need to do first?
Thanks. I just want to move on to another question.
Can I just answer that question?
Sorry, yes, Michael, yeah.
Yeah, and that is that if Joe Biden wants to fiddle around with taxes on the Isle of Man, then he can come down here to Tremode and he can stand for Tynwald like the seven of us. But in the meantime, I think it's incumbent upon him to focus on fixing his own broken tax system rather than to break our tax system.
Well, it might be down to one of you to go down to London every other week and convince Westminster otherwise, I guess. But just another question on the economy. A recent Chamber of Commerce survey found that over 75% of respondents identified that recruiting suitably experienced staff, qualified staff, was a challenge for their business. If elected, how will you support businesses with this challenge to ensure that the island doesn't face a recruitment crisis? Amanda Walker.
I think one of the things we could do, we have UCM, which offers a very limited range of courses, which it necessarily has to do because of the economy of scale, and we have no accommodation block for it, so we can't really attract many foreign students in. I think we need to seriously look at investing in our young people to encourage them to come back to the island. I think university tuition fees definitely need a look at. I think it's absolutely ludicrous that very high income individuals get exactly the same support for their children as people on middle incomes. Children who are from very low income families are supported far better, which I think they need to be to enable them to have access to higher education. But we need to have a linked up thing through the Chamber of Commerce and through employers. One of my roles when I was a teacher was that I was head of careers, and I did all of the work experience, and I've worked with junior achievement quite extensively as well. So I know that there are a lot of young people who would like to return to the island, but they need to be given guidance at the right stage, at 14 rather than at 18, to enable them to make the informed choices. So we need proper data gathering, and we need proper medium-term planning to actually have a look at where the skills shortages are likely to be and the specific skill sectors that our young people need to be going into.
Thank you. Jodie Farragher?
So I think that a lot of the answer to that question is actually in terms of an ethos that you will bring. And I think that if we make the island an attractive place to live, that we will therefore be attracting more young people here, and there won't be a skills shortage. And a lot of my policies will be based around that. So affordable housing, so that young people can get on the property ladder. Looking at progressive drug laws, so that we are actually getting on top of the war on drugs. Looking at greening our towns and our economy. Looking at all of these things feed into a country and a society that's actually going to be an attractive and pleasant place to live, and good public services and will all feed into this. So if we do actually up our game and have world-class public services, which we should have as a wealthy economy, I think that bringing that ethos into Tynwald will actually mean that the island is a much more attractive place to live, and we will no longer have a skills shortage.
Thank you. Claire Barber?
I think it goes back to a number of the topics we've already touched on, actually. The availability of affordable housing, the ability to get on and off the island easily, access to private healthcare is certainly something that a number of businesses want, because they have that as part of the contract that they offer their employees, and access to excellent education. So I think those things that we've already identified as priorities actually will then be the things that become the draw for bringing new people here to the island and retaining them, because actually sometimes it's not just the recruitment, it's the retention. So I think it's imperative we get the whole package correct in order that we can attract those people to the island to benefit the businesses that the Chamber of Commerce has rightly identified. But I think it's also so important that we don't put unnecessary bureaucracy in the way, because I've certainly come across businesses just in the last year and a half who've gone through huge hoops to get their business established on the island, to bring their staff over here, but actually it became difficult at some point in the process, and they've gone off to somewhere else. And I think we really need to take that very seriously. We need to look at what's happening in those processes where people aren't getting across the final hurdle and actually coming to the island, and then address those, because if we're not addressing them, we're failing.
Thank you. Christine Urquhart?
Thank you. I was going to say, ask could I be next? All of these issues aren't new issues. The recruitment crisis isn't new. Affordable housing, it isn't new. These have been getting battered around the table every election, every Tynwald sitting, battered around the table, and nothing's changing. It's time that this administration coming in actually changes it. And I agreed with a lot of what Amanda said. We need to diversify our education, provide more education, start teaching them when they reach 14 years old, start implementing life lessons within education and help these people come forward. None of this is new, and we're just acting like it is, like it's just happened. It hasn't. It's been going on for a long time. We need to start addressing that and understanding why is that constantly the same topics coming onto the table and not getting dealt with. That needs to stop.
Thank you. John Jockin?
Yeah, affordable housing, again, is part of the problem. It always has been the problem. Christine said it always has been, even when I was buying my first house with a princely sum of £20,000. But it was it was a lot of money at the time, I can assure you, when you were getting 50 quid a week. It was, yeah, so however, it was always been very difficult. But getting back to the subject is the specific skills that we need on this island. First of all, the government have neglected our young people. I personally think they've neglected. They haven't brought in a proper apprenticeship for people who've got a massive skills shortage for tradesmen on the Isle of Man, a massive skills shortage. And we've got all the workshops for engineering, joinery, brickwork, all that sort of stuff. And there's young people, and they can make good money if they're good at it. Okay, there's a good way of making a living there. You don't have to sit behind a desk. And then we have specific skills that you need in the technology company. It should be a combination of the government and the employer that come up to a scheme to educate it. Because the employer, they want these specific skills. And if they want them, they'll pay for them. Just like they'll pay them good money, they'll train them as well. And work with the college, the UCM as it is now. Yes, we've got the facilities to train them ourselves.
Thank you. Michael Joseph.
Thanks for the question from the Chamber of Commerce, Richard. And I guess I've got to be upfront in that I disagreed, and I've got a strong track record of disagreeing with the Chamber of Commerce and some of their proposals on this area, dating back to 2018, where I debated when they were proposing to make the migration system a free-for-all. I stood up against that because I believe that our migration system should be carefully managed and carefully controlled. And so I think that the solution to the skills challenges and the recruitment challenges is, first of all, businesses should pay workers more to attract them to work. Then the way to make that happen is by ensuring that Manx people and the children growing up, but also our people who have left, are highly productive workers, and that requires enabling them to have good access to education so that they can be productive and generate good value. And second of all, to enable businesses to invest in tools and to invest in new technology that enables Manx workers and people here on the Isle of Man to be more productive and to generate the value that then earns higher wages.
Thank you. And Peter Gilmore.
Yeah, it's quite sad actually when like 20 years ago, most students, when they went off to university, mum would expect them back. I mean, I've talked to a few people very upset because their children can't afford to come back. The people who've left have already told us the answer. It's too expensive to travel. They've been surveyed time and time again. There's not enough of the right type of jobs, so we need to diversify the economy. And it's too expensive to live here in terms of housing. So we know we can do something about housing if we want to. We know we can do something about diversifying, and as I've said earlier, diversification, information technology, the digital economy, we can set up all kinds of companies here. They can even work for an Isle of Man company if they're in Thailand if they want, and do a tour of Thailand, but they've still got a bit of a part-time job and a link back to the Isle of Man. You know, that's what we really need to do. We really need to diversify this economy to encourage people to come back.
Thanks so much, Peter, and thank you, panel. That wraps up our questions for this evening. All that remains now is for each candidate to give us their final few words on why they should get your vote. And first up, we have Amanda Walker.
Right, well, I would very much like you to give me your backing on election day, the 23rd of September. I've lived in Douglas East for over 20 years. I've got 36 years experience in the teaching profession. I've just done 8 months working with young offenders. I'm the daughter of a nurse. I've been married to a nurse for over 30 years. So I've got very good experience of health service. I think I know what the key priorities are. I have a huge interest in the environment. My eldest daughter studied environment, ecology and economics at York University, largely as a result of the fact that she was brought up by an eco-warrior, and that I have been educating on environmental issues throughout my teaching career. I think that the Isle of Man is an absolutely wonderful place to live. I very much love living in Douglas East. I think there are fundamental basic things that we've got to get right. I have to strongly disagree that the promenade is marvellous, because I walk the promenade every day and there hasn't been an iota done to the seaward side of the promenade, and I would certainly certainly like to see something positive done with that, and the pavements in and around Douglas as well, because on election day for the local elections, I stumbled and hurt my arm very badly, and I've got good eyesight and balance. I will vehemently oppose shared space because I think it's an utter disaster, and I will do so in memory of Jack Corran, who vehemently opposed it on behalf of Manx Blind Welfare. I think it's a horrendous idea, and I have experience of it in Poynton in Cheshire, where it works very, very badly.
Thank you, Amanda. Christine Urquhart.
Hi, I think you should vote for me because I will provide you with the transparency you've been looking for all these years. As I've already raised here, we are regurgitating topics that have been on manifestos time and time and time again. That needs to stop, and we need to start pushing forward. We need to understand why these processes are taking so long. I advocate for the most vulnerable in our society. I will continue to do so, but also look into why they are so vulnerable in the first place and help lift them up. So that comes with the minimum wage, the living wage, affordable housing, health and social care, mental health. And yeah, I promise I can give you honesty, transparency. I will stay in touch with you, and accountability. Accountability is a massive thing of mine, of what I'll be striving for in government, and seeking independence, who sit on the periphery of government to hold government to account with statutory powers to do so. So yeah, vote Christine for Keys.
Thank you, Christine. John Jockin.
Hello, thank you for inviting me. I'd like you to support me because I have a strict set of policies I would like to bring forward. I never promise anybody anything. I don't think any candidate can promise anybody anything. You have to work as a team with whoever gets elected. But my key priorities will be affordable housing for our young people. The brownfield sites that I've identified 9 of in Douglas East, all in Douglas East, that have been lying empty for all this time. They should be redeveloped for our young people, and sheltered accommodation, affordable housing, they should be on there. And also, why have we got the worst pension in Europe? Why have we only getting £180 a week for a pensioner that's worked all their lives? I think it's disgraceful. In Germany, it's £26,000 a year. We are the poorest pension in the whole of Europe. We don't have to cut and paste whatever happens in Westminster. Why can't we pay more into our fund and have a much better standard of living? The minimum wage is £300-something. The living wage is £377. You're asking a pensioner to live on £180, pay their rent if they're in social housing, £120 a week, and live off £60 a week. That is called pension poverty, and that has been happening on this island for the past, however long, 50 years. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Michael Joseph.
Thank you, first of all, to Richard and the whole ELS team and Energy FM for making this tonight happen. Second of all, thank you to each of the candidates for putting your head above the parapet and to be judged by our fellow voters. And third of all, thank you to you, the viewer at home. You've endured more than an hour of listening to us talk, so you deserve to be congratulated and thanked. It's been really good over this hour and a bit that we've been able to talk about a couple of my priorities here, which is first of all easing the squeeze on the cost of living, and second of all increasing the accountability for senior government officials. However, one of the things that I'm disappointed we didn't get more time to chat about was addressing the shadow pandemic of the mental health crisis. Our Mental Health Act was last updated in 1988, and the advice from Manx Care has been that if this our Mental Health Act is not updated soon, then we are at risk of falling afoul of our reciprocal agreements with the Cross and elsewhere. And so we really need to fix this. And so I encourage you, if you've endured more than an hour and a bit of listening to us here online, have a look at my website at michaeljosem.com, where you can read more of the detail about our policy to address the mental health crisis, to address the squeeze on the cost of living, and third of all, to increase accountability for senior government officials. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Peter Gilmore.
I'd like you to vote for me because I am very experienced and I would like to start seeing some of the reports that Tynwald have completed over the last 15 years start to be enacted. We do need to start joining up government processes, people, systems and information. We do need to start looking at the overmanagement in government. We need to look at restructuring government properly. We need to focus on frontline services and spend our money on that. In terms of the skills crisis and the housing crisis, these are causing together a very dangerous decline in our economy. It's stopping companies from recruiting, expanding, or even locating here. We are down to 2 sectors of the economy which provide 40% of our income at the moment. If one of those goes wrong, or regulations change, we could be in very dire straits. So we do need to concentrate on diversifying the economy. It will also encourage more of our youngsters to stay on the island, instead of 40% of them under 30 leaving. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Joni Farragher.
Thank you. Well, I hope you feel like you've had the chance to get to know me a little bit better. And I just want to invite everybody to please get in touch with me to either continue any of the discussions that we've been having this evening, or indeed to open new discussions. Please look me up on Facebook or get in touch with me on the contact details that are provided on there, my telephone number. I guess I just want to conclude by saying that if elected, I will bring accountability, transparency, dedication and as much genuine compassion and passion for our island as I could put into the role. I really sincerely feel like we have been lacking the human touch in our government for a long time, and one thing that we haven't touched upon over the course of this discussion is that our society has become a lot more unequal in recent times, which research shows us time and time again is bad for everybody, including the wealthiest. So actually recalibrating a little bit and making it a greater level of equality within our society is better for everybody, as well as bringing us excellent world-class public services and giving us the income for that. Thank you very much for listening this evening.
Thank you, Joni. Claire Barber.
Thank you, Richard, and thank you to the team, and thank you to the audience for the questions, which I think have been really insightful, actually. And I've thoroughly enjoyed talking to people on the doorstep. There's still more to go. But obviously, if you do have further queries that haven't been answered either here or within the manifesto, when that arrives, please do reach out to me. I've had the opportunity over the last 5 years to demonstrate my commitment. I've brought a raft of legislation that I've supported and been key to, such as the Sexual Offences Act, the Justice Reform Act, the Domestic Abuse Act, and the Abortion Reform Act, some really important pieces of legislation. I've also had the opportunity to be involved in policy development, the evolution of Manx care and the transformation that's occurring now within our health and care services, which is really important. I brought my background as a nurse to be able to focus on that. But also on the scrutiny angle, I feel I've demonstrated very clearly my willingness to scrutinise strongly the actions of government, with 3 reports into the promenade scheme. I've had an extensive report into the meat plant and the dairy industry, which have really focused on the separation of operation from regulation and the separation of strategy from operation. We really need to understand better what it is government are trying to achieve, and rather than worrying about the colour of the bus seats, we need to be looking at the service that we're providing. So I do hope you might feel able to lend me one of your votes on September the 23rd and vote Claire Barber for Douglas East. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Claire, and thank you again to all of the candidates for attending this evening. Just to remind you, they are Claire Barber, Joni Farragher, Peter Gilmore, Michael Josem, John Jockin, Christine Urquhart, and Amanda Walker. Now, it's over to you. Where will your votes be going on September the 23rd? Thank you for watching. Goodbye.